All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for your patience as we all settle into the webinar. We're going to begin in just a moment. We're going to give it just a little bit longer, and then we'll get started. Okay, welcome to our MPF webinar, Fabulous Fish of Missouri's Prairie Streams with Darren Thornhill. My name is Amanda Lance Ramrap, and I am the Events and Communications Coordinator for the Missouri Prairie Foundation and Grow Native program. Thank you all for joining us today for the next webinar of our 2025 series. Before we continue, I'd like to review a couple Zoom basics, so bear with me. Today's webinar will feature a presentation and Q&A session. When you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section on your Zoom screen, which you will find on the bar at the bottom of your window. Questions placed into the chat will be redirected to the Q&A section. Lily Grimroth, our MPF Conservation Program Associate, will join Darren on screen at the end of the presentation to read your submitted questions aloud. Thanks in advance for your thoughtful live submissions. Access to this recording and other related information will be sent to all who registered in a follow-up email tomorrow. Now to introduce our speaker, Darren Thornhill. Darren is the Science Supervisor for the Aquatic Diversity and Game Fish Unit at the Missouri Department of Conservation. Darren earned a Bachelor's of Science from the University of Missouri in Fisheries and Wildlife Management and an MS from the University of Idaho in Fisheries Resources. Darren began his 22 career with the Department of Conservation as a Fisheries Management Biologist in the Kirksville office. There, he assisted private landowners with stream erosion and pond fish management in the Northeast region before being promoted to Watershed Ecologist, studying impacts of best management practices on the headwater streams. In his current position, Darren supervises scientists leading amphibian and reptile, aquatic invertebrate, mollusk, rare fishes, and sport fishes programs within the state of Missouri. All right, I think we're ready to navigate Missouri's prairie waters. So without further delay, Darren, I'll turn things over to you. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Welcome, everyone. As was mentioned in my introduction, I'm the Science Supervisor of the Aquatic Diversity and Game Fish Unit at the Missouri Department of Conservation. I spent the majority of my career in Missouri working on prairie stream fishes and habitats, and I've worked with Carol David over the years to highlight these important components to Missouri's natural heritage. And so I always appreciate her continued efforts to promote their virtues in forums like this. So without further ado, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about prairie stream fishes and their habitats. So when I talk about prairie fishes, just a little bit of distinction here. The prairie fish assemblage is based on what we call the aquatic faunal regions. And so in Missouri, we don't have really any fish that are quote unquote prairie obligates, meaning they occur across the prairie, but sometimes in the Ozark border or the Ozarks, and they're not necessarily associated with prairie versus savanna or woodland or something like that. So when I'm talking about prairie fishes, I'm talking about those that are typically found in the streams represented by the aquatic faunal regions. Now, I like this map here. I believe it was hand drawn and definitely hand colored in by Dr. Bill Flieger for the Crayfishes of Missouri book, but they're the same aquatic faunal regions across all aquatic taxa. And so the description for this particular faunal region found from our website states that the aquatic faunal region includes most of the state north of the Missouri River, plus a wedge-shaped area south of Missouri along the Kansas state line. This region is mostly flat or rolling plains. The area north of the Missouri River was flattened by glaciers long ago. The prairies south of the river were not glaciated. Shales and thin sandstones are the principal bedrocks, but these can be covered by as much as 150 feet by loess soils, and loess is a coarse grained material blown by winds during glacial times and which collected like dunes in certain areas. Missouri's prairie regions today are dominated by cropland, but before settlers arrived and broke the sod with their plows, these lands were covered by treeless tallgrass prairie, with woods in the more hilly areas. Those native grasslands and forests are nearly all gone. The prairie faunal region is drained by a number of rivers. These typically occupy broad, flat valleys that slope gradually into the surrounding uplands. Originally, most of these streams meandered in S-shaped courses and often formed oxbow lakes and sloughs as they shifted their beds. Most of these streams, however, have been channelized and are now straight with a nearly uniform depth. The stream bottoms in the prairie region are typically silt, sand, or gravel, and the water is generally turbid, meaning not clear due to clay and soil particles suspended in the water. Stream flow and other water conditions can vary over the course of a year, so the animals that live in these streams must be able to tolerate fluctuations of current, depth, dissolved oxygen levels, temperatures, and so on. So I think that's a nice little description of the type of habitat that you'll find the prairie stream fishes in within the prairie aquatic faunal region. So more specifically, most of my experience has been in the Central Plains Grand Sheraton Ecological Drainage Unit of north central Missouri. And so that will be most of the focus of my presentation today, because that's what I have the most familiarity with and also the most pictures from. So just kind of a short description of that from Tim Nye from the Missouri Aquatic Biodiversity Assessment. There are approximately 27,000 kilometers of primary stream channel within this ecological drainage unit, and it's entirely contained within the central dissected till plains ecological section. And the most characteristic feature of this EDU is the presence of pre-Illinoisan glacial till covered with a thin veneer of loess. Basically talking about that loess covering shales and thin bedded limestones again. Something to notice here is if you look at this map of the drainages that form up this ecological drainage unit, I'm going to use a laser pointer here. You'll see that these streams mostly flow north and south, and they have fairly defined wider valleys that again flow from north to south into the Grand River. And so with the western side being typically with lower gradient than the eastern side, the Sheridan River system is lumped in with the Grand River, although they don't actually, the Sheridan does not actually flow into the Grand River. They both are tributaries of the Missouri River, but they're lumped in together because of their similarities. So moving on to the next slide. This aerial relief map of just a portion of the Grand and Sheridan EDU. I put this on here so you could see kind of that generally over wide valleys that contain the low gradient north to south flowing streams. So if you look at this gradient relief map, you'll notice how this area is flat. Well, that's the floodplain of this stream here. This happens to be actually the Locust Creek floodplain, and you'll notice how it's basically north to south and fairly wide, and allows for that low gradient stream to naturally have had more of an S-shape stream channel. This flat area here that runs from essentially Green City up through Lemons up into the Iowa line. That happens to be the divide between the Sheridan Basin and the Grand River Basin. So it's just a flat prairie area that divides the two, and you'll see on both sides of it kind of the high relief, the higher gradient, smaller streams that form the headwater streams that then flow into the lower gradient streams there. So that's something just to draw your attention to. And then as we move along, I'll be speaking mostly about streams in this area right here, as outlined by this pointer. So moving on to that, talking about the Spring Creek watershed in Adair, Putnam, and Sullivan counties. What I'm going to talk about are several, the next several slides are summary data from multiple studies and monitoring surveys that have been conducted in the Spring Creek watershed. And the Spring Creek watershed is a Missouri Department of Conservation priority geography, meaning this is an area where whenever we're prioritizing our work with landowners or on public areas, such as the areas in green, which are conservation areas, we prioritize that work above areas that are outside of it because we're trying to get the most bang for our buck and time spent. And so it's a high quality area. And so it's more in trying to take advantage of the good habitat and the number of species that are there, and move the needle forward a little bit, but definitely keep it from falling off. So some things to note from this map. The watershed, just so we define our terms here in case folks aren't familiar with this. The watershed is the area of land that drains to a particular body of water. So in this example, this kind of ellipse shaped black outline is all the former and existing prairie, savanna, and woodland that drains into the streams that make up the Spring Creek watershed. So later on, I'll be referencing something known as stream order. And so to define stream order, well, first of all, stream order, it really reflects the topographical dissection more so than the watershed size of a stream. And it's calculated like this. So each single blue line, so that one and that one, those are each first order streams. And then when two of those come together at that point, it's a second order stream. And whenever you have two second order streams, so this is a second order here, this is a second order, when you have two of those come together, it becomes a third order stream, and so on and so forth, up through fourth and fifth. I believe the largest in this watershed is actually fourth order stream. So once we get to this point, Spring Creek proper becomes a fourth order stream. Now, it's a smaller size fourth order stream at this point than it is down at the lower end of the watershed, because obviously it's got more streams draining into it. So that's where the order doesn't necessarily dictate the size of the watershed. It just kind of dictates how many smaller streams are making up that. And then if you see these 4-digit numbers here, those are not years, those are just site numbers, and those come in a little bit later on a couple graphs that I show. And just to avoid confusion, those have to do with a numbering system, and so those are site numbers that I'll reference. So they're not dates or anything, they're site numbers that were used for a research project I conducted on headwater stream dissolved oxygen. And so moving on to the next slide, I talked a little bit about general descriptions of prairie streams. And so one of those was about the substrate in the stream. So generally speaking, they have the stream bed is made up mostly of sand, gravel, and fines. And so this histogram is a conglomeration of multiple stream habitat surveys in the Spring Creek watershed on streams ranging from first to fourth order. And so when adding all those up, putting them into this histogram, we see that yes, sand is definitely the more common class of substrate. And then we have gravel and fines, and then a little bit of cobble and clay pan, but definitely sand. So that definitely bears true. That general idea that prairie streams are more sand bed streams. Yes, they're made up mostly of sand. So it's definitely the more common class of substrate, of course, and then gravel and fines. Smaller order streams are typically higher gradient, and they contain more gravel and boulders than the lower gradient high order counterparts. So a smaller stream will typically have more of this larger material in it, cobble and boulder, and the size classes of these are like, this is like pea size. This cobble is in like the 2 to 3 inch range. Boulder is larger than that, a rock larger than that. So anywhere from like 4 to feet across, and then bedrock is bedrock. Clay pan is a hard clay substrate, and then fines are like that silty stuff that is smaller than sand. So gravel and cobble tend to be from eroded glacial deposits in these areas, as opposed to fractured bedrock, although the latter can be a significant source in localized areas. So that means whenever you come across gravel and cobble in these streams, typically they derived from some sort of glacial till that has been eroded. Rarely is it broken up bedrock, but there are localized areas where you have bedrock outcroppings, typically limestone, but also sandstone, that are fractured and broken up, and then they add to that rock component. And then you also get I don't know if it's significant, but you do get quite a bit of gravel in the form of road gravel that washes out off of roads into ditches down into the stream itself. So sometimes you'll pick up gravel that definitely did not originate from that area, and that's typical in a lot of these streams. Clay pan and bedrock often provide vertical control or stability for these streams that have a high level of historical channelization, as they are somewhat resistant to erosion. So whenever streams were channelized, meaning that they straightened the streams to improve drainage and make it easier to farm and move the water off more quickly, well, when that happens, it causes actually more erosion because you've shortened the length of the stream, so you've increased its gradient and erosive capability, and so it begins down cutting and then widening. And as that is moving up from the lower point up into the headwaters, whenever it encounters a layer of sediment that's resistant to that cutting, that's typically bedrock or clay pan, and so that slows that down cutting down. And so some of the streams we're going to be talking about in just a little bit actually have quite a bit of bedrock in the lower areas, which has prevented the channelization, the head cutting from the channelization of like the Sheridan River to reach in the headwaters and actually preserve those habitats and allowed the fish communities to flourish there. So moving on from talking about substrate, this just demonstrates a phenomenon that you'll see. So whenever you look at sites, the number of species, or first of all, we're looking at average wetted width versus the average thalweg depth. And so when you plot those together, you almost have a one-to-one correlation. As the stream gets wider, typically the depth, the thalweg is the deepest part of the stream. Typically you'll see that will also increase in depth. So larger streams are deeper typically. That's pretty common sense, but the science bears it out as well. So whenever thinking about how that impacts species, these types of streams typically derive their water from surface runoff. And so because of that, they don't have they're not spring fed. They don't have they do have groundwater inputs, but they're limited due to the soils and runoff and things like that. So the depth of the stream is very important in preserving the fish community throughout the drier periods of the year. And so there's a couple things working there, but basically having a deeper stream typically means that you will have more fish species present because they can last longer through the dry periods. And so looking at this graph here of some of those sites, just plotting, ignore this part right here, but the thowag depth, so 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 centimeters, the number of species, we see this relationship, this logarithmic relationship. As you increase in depth, as you have a higher average depth of a stream, you begin to gain species up to some threshold of the number of species in that watershed. So typically deeper streams have more fish present in them. And in these particular streams, there's actually a better relationship between the wetted width. So the wider streams also have more fish species, and in these streams, the wider streams typically are the larger order streams. So all this is really making sense. You know, that's what you would expect, but the important part to think about here is that relationship between depth and the number of species. So even if it is a small order stream, if you can maintain deeper pools throughout the year, then typically you have higher diversity in those stream communities. Looking at dissolved oxygen, so I did a study on headwater streams and dissolved oxygen. Basically, it's highly variable across streams, but there are streams that have very good watersheds. These are smaller streams. All these are like second and third order streams, but those that have high quality watersheds that provide for adequate depths and plenty of shading tend to have better dissolved oxygen profiles, meaning that you know, everything has to breathe. Well, fish breathe oxygen that's dissolved in the water, and so cooler water holds more oxygen, and you get cooler water by depth and by shade. And so all this basically shows is the importance of the depth and the shading to these smaller streams, allowing again a diverse community to persist. So now that we've gotten through some of the less interesting water quality information and you know, talking about sand and gravel and things, we'll get into kind of talking about some of the fish we might encounter. And so I approached this in thinking about, if I were going out to a stream system and walking from the very top of the drainage down to the receiving streams, what I would encounter and where I would expect to sample fish or to see fish, or what I would expect to see. So this slide here is a photo of an unnamed first order stream on Poozy Conservation Area in Livingston County. And so this stream looks beautiful. It's all bedrock outcroppings, very little incision from head cutting. The stream is interesting because of the high percentage of limestone bedrock through its length, which provides that vertical stability, preventing, again, head cutting from the downstream Thompson River, which is heavily channelized. The flow is surface runoff dominated. There's no springs. There's no strong groundwater inputs here. It's likely above wherever that water table is. So flow is surface runoff dominated. So the stream would likely only have limited aquatic life present during the spring and early summer when rain is plentiful. Pool depth is greatly limited by the bedrock. So even though it provides that vertical stability, you can't form pools in it. And so it's only an inch or so deep. And so as the water dries up, as rains kind of stop during the summer, this type of stream would begin to dry up. And then by midsummer, it'll be almost completely dry. There might be a couple deeper pools that are tucked under a root wad or something. Sometimes along the side, you might get a deeper pool that will hold some water. But typically a stream like this, I would not go to this to sample for fish. I wouldn't expect there to be much in there. There might be a few small numbers of fish that have moved up in there during a high water event, but summer comes around, they're not going to be in there. So real pretty to look at, fun to sit and contemplate life next to, but not really where you would go to start looking for that streamfish community. Moving downstream, this one's a little less pretty to look at, but we're transitioning from that really high in the watershed stream that we look like, the ephemeral one. And the previous slide, you may see something that is has a clay pan bed to it, and it'd be a similar situation where it's high enough in the watershed that it just doesn't hold water other than the really wet periods. And so similar, with the clay pan or the limestone, same effect. Moving further downstream, we're getting into the more of the sand bed dominated second order stream. So there's intermittent flow here. And so when I talk about stream flow, there's basically three categories, because we always like to lump things into three things, right? So ephemeral, meaning only wet only during the wet periods because it's surface runoff. You have perennial, so that's like a permanent stream. It's always got water in it. And because you have those two categories, you got to sandwich one in between. So you got intermittent, and that's somewhere in between. Now, really, there's a gradient there, and so it's not cut and dry always. So you're moving from ephemeral to perennial, but there's all these gradients. And so here, it's an intermittent stream, but it'll likely maintain some subsurface flow due to the sand substrate. So if you've got sandy soil at home or something like that, you'll know that it doesn't hold a lot of water on top of it because it's porous, and so water it infiltrates it. Well, the same can be said in a sand bed stream. Is the water can still be there, you're just not seeing it at the surface. It's moving through the sediment, through the sand bed, and then when it encounters some deeper pools, that water will then come out of what's called the hyporheic zone, but it'll move into that surface area. And so a stream like this will maintain shallow pools right around the cut bank or root wads. And so a stream like this will have a limited aquatic community, usually maybe 1 to 3 species of fish, depending on the stream. But those fish will likely persist throughout the year, especially the years that have consistent summer rainfall. I mean, this could dry up during a really dry summer, but maybe half the years or more years than half, it would maintain enough water in it to maintain a very limited fish community. And so the fish species that I would expect to find there is either the sand shiner, which is this one here, or the big mouth shiner, which looks almost identical to it, only it has a bigger mouth. But they occupy the same areas. That's the type of fish I would expect to see in a stream like that. And you'll see a lot of them. They are fairly common across the Prairie Faunal region. So each picture of a fish that I show you, I'll show a distributional map. And so you can see here that, as I said before, we don't really have prairie obligate fish species. So, sand shiner is found in places outside of the Prairie Faunal region. It's found in the Ozarks and then the big rivers and things like that. But it's kind of one of those characteristic species in the Prairie Faunal region. So, and again, aptly named, they seem to prefer shallow, sandy bottom streams. They're often found alongside big mouth shiners, as I mentioned, which look very similar and almost as common. And some of the fish data that I might encounter as a biologist, if it said sand shiner on there, you know, it was either a sand shiner or a big mouth shiner typically, because they're so easily confused that oftentimes one will get mistaken for the other. Something about the sand shiner: they live in schools in midwater or near the bottom. They're found most often with the red fin, big mouth common, and topeka shiners. They take most of their food on or near the bottom. It's a generalized species as far as food habitat or habits. And spawning occurs over clean gravelly riffles, but the details of spawning behavior are not known. And so likely the gravel riffles that these spawn over are would be like very large sand, tiny pea gravel, somewhere in between that coarse sand to pea gravel size. So that's the sand shiner. Not very colorful, but pretty common, and something that you would encounter at almost every prairie stream. Moving down in the watershed, we're starting to move to a third order stream. So we're getting a little bit bigger, a little bit more flow. We see better pool development. So you see this pool underneath this large tree that's fallen down into the channel. We will have a scour pool here, and it might only be a foot to 2 feet deep. Not anything you go swimming in, but in a stream system like this, that kind of depth is very significant for a fish community. And so the stream still might be intermittent. It's still on that, on that gradient. We're moving more towards perennial, but we're not quite there. The deep pool would likely retain water throughout the entire year. Water would definitely infiltrate through the subsurface. They'd move through the sand, and it'd keep the pool with adequate water during most years. And actually, it actually cools the water down as it flows through, so it helps it keep that pool a little cooler, and allows it to maintain a decent dissolved oxygen concentration. Again, there's also some small pea-size gravel in the pool and small riffles right above it, and probably has flowing water during the spring and early summer. So fish species I would expect to encounter in something like that. The first one would be the creek chub. And so the adult creek chubs are the largest native minnow species in Missouri. When I was a kid, I remember catching these on, I grew up in Howard County, and we'd go wade fishing in the Montauk Creek, and I'd catch these on ultralight tackle. And so they could get 8 or 10 inches long, and put up a decent fight for a kid out having fun in the summer. So anyway, the creek chub, again, if you look at the distribution, it's all over the state. But it's one of those that you would expect to find in a prairie stream. And one of the interesting features of the creek chub is they actually utilize gravel for spawning. And so they construct these long spawning nests. They're long, and it's a low ridge of washed gravel with an oval pit at its downstream end. And then they defend the nest vigorously. And they're actually pretty interesting. I've done some small stream snorkeling for fish research, and you can actually, they'll get big enough, like if you catch a little crayfish, they'll take it out of your hand, kind of like people do in snorkeling and in the ocean and everything with I don't know, larger fish and everything. So it's pretty interesting. Interesting species, kind of bland looking. A lot of the prairie fish species aren't extremely colorful, but this is one that you would expect to see. The males get tubercles on their heads. and they usually they use those to fight off other males. They're kind of a spiky scale on their heads. So the next fish species I would expect to see, this one's a little more colorful during mating season. This is a male here. This is a central stone roller. Um, Central stone rollers, again, almost statewide distribution, but I would expect to find them in prairie streams. There's two types of stone rollers in Missouri: central and large scale. North of Missouri River, you're going to encounter central stone rollers only. They have this on their upper mouth part, a bony structure that allows them to scrape algae off of rocks, and so you'll actually see them kind of moving through the water, grazing, and they'll push stones over in search of fresh algae to eat and everything like that. But they're kind of the buffalo of the headwater stream, if you will. They're moving through, eating all the algae and stuff like that off the rocks, and they can get fairly large as far as cyprinid or minnow species is concerned. Pretty bulky fish. Typically in the small headwater streams, they're only a couple inches long, but in larger streams, you'll see males like this that are 3 or 4 inches long. They're early spring spawners, and they build shallow pit nests as well in small gravel. This next fish species, the common shiner. This is an interesting one as far as distribution is concerned in Missouri. It's got these two areas, this area in the central part of the state, and then the area where I'm at up in north central Missouri in the upper Sheridan. And so I encounter this fish a lot. It actually gets to be a fairly large minnow species. You can't see the dorsal side of it, but it has this really dark line along the dorsal side of the fish. So they're really easy to identify whenever you sample them, because that it shows up it's really dark against the fish, and it keys you into it's a common shiner. And then it has these kind of a scaleless scale pattern. The scales are there, but it looks like they're missing. Those are some of the interesting features. This is a colored male, again, has tubercles on the head, and then they get these red areas on their fins. I'm not certain I've ever seen a colored up male like this. On a side note, the photographer that took all these photos, Lance Mary, really good at bringing the colors out of the fish that you may not really be able to see with your naked eye. Like, he's able to use his filters and stuff to really pull out some of those colors that if you had the fish in your hand, you wouldn't necessarily see it. But once he puts it, under film, it really shows up. So just an interesting side note about that. They often occur in schools, in midwater with other shiner species. From what I have seen of common shiners, at least in the north central part of the state, they're typically found in larger streams. So a larger second order or third order, it's got to have deep pools with gravel to cobble substrate. They don't really like the shallowy areas. Next species I'd expect to find there is one of two darter species we have in this part of the state, and that is the Johnny darter. And so if you, again, looking at the distribution, it's mostly related to the prairies. You'll find them elsewhere, but if you see a darter anywhere in the Grand Sheridan River ecological drainage unit, probably 9.9 times out of 10, it's going to be a Johnny darter. And so unlike darters from the Ozarks, they do fine in warm, still water pools. They kind of hang out at the edge of a riffle, and as it slowly dries up, they move into the pools to make it through the dry period, and then you'll see them in the riffles again whenever it's running again. So You'll see them, but near debris in the stream as well. They hide under that. But if you look in the stream and you see a little fish kind of darting along, herky jerky movements, that's probably a Johnny Darter in one of these streams. So moving a little bit downstream. So let's say we encounter some pool development. So this is a second order, third order stream, so we're moving downstream, but we're encountering beaver dams. So in some of these prairie streams, you'll have a lot of beaver activity. And so with that comes pools that have greater depth. And so it maintains the pool depth longer during the summer. Only in extremely dry summers do they dry up. So what that tends to add, because of that increased wetted width, we've got a wider stream here and we've got greater depth. Typically it means more habitat available for more species. And so this is where we're adding in something. Now, this is a federally endangered species. They're very rare, but this is the topeka shiner. And their range is extremely limited today within the state of Missouri. However, we do have some non-essential experimental populations where we have gone in and tried to reestablish them here and here in the state. And so as you get a little more depth, now they'll go way up in the headwaters as well, but they do prefer, especially for spawning, deeper pools that are clear, sand and gravel substrate, but that clear water seems to be important for them. And part of that is because their spawning strategy is they utilize the nests of sunfish to spawn on. And so sunfish, typically the males guard the nests to keep other fish from eating the eggs. And so the topeka shiners will lay their eggs and will then fertilize those eggs right at the edge of the sunfish nest, and they'll allow that sunfish to protect their eggs, and also the sunfish sit there and they fan the nest with their tail to keep water circulating over it, to improve dissolved oxygen flow over it. And so they're oxygenating those eggs and protecting them. And then whenever they hatch similar time as the sunfish do, and then they're guarded for a while by that male. And so it's an interesting strategy that they utilize. However, they're very susceptible to predation. So a lot of these headwater streams with largemouth bass being introduced into them from like farm ponds and things like that, they're very susceptible because of that strategy of utilizing sunfish nests. They swim up to a sunfish. One might happen to be a largemouth bass and then eats it readily. So topeka shiner. Next species I'd encounter there. This is like your one of the most beautiful, I think, prairie stream fishes there is the red shiner. I think it rivals any tropical fish you could buy at the store. The males get very, very red on the fins, steel colored, and then you get this chevron right here. Just a beautiful little fish. They too utilize sunfish nests for spawning, and so you'll find them alongside topeka shiners, and then alongside a sunfish I'll talk about in a little bit later. So mostly active during daytime. Just a really, really pretty fish. As far as interesting suckers go, the white sucker, it inhabits a lot of smaller streams, and so it's one of the few suckers that you'll encounter in prairie headwater streams, and especially streams that have the higher gradient, bedrock outcroppings, boulders, things like that. They really prefer that and the cool water, and they'll get fairly sizable. They may get 12 to 14 inches in a really small stream if they've got the proper habitat there. They eat aquatic invertebrates and things like that. So really interesting fish. Um, the young of the year have black spots on them, so they're real pretty. Look different whenever they're young of the year. Moving down to a large third order or small fourth order stream, again, we've got more riffle development, more pool development, much more woody debris in here, larger corridors. And this is where we'd start picking up a fish like this. So this is the orange spotted sunfish. So I said the red shiner is one of the most beautiful. I'd say this one probably ties it. This is a male orange spotted sunfish. They're really neat fish. They only get 3 inches at max. They're a type of fish that a topeka shiner, you would want a topeka shiner to spawn over the nest of. Typically, they'll seek out backwater areas, really slow moving areas, sand, shallow, and that's where they'll make their nests. And so, if you're familiar with like bluegill nests in a pond, those are fun to fish over. You'll see something similar in a small stream with a kind of a honeycomb of nests, and so you'll have these males all in their nests, and they're spread out a little bit, but like they're guarding each individual nest. And so you'll have these swarms of small fish coming in to raid the nests. And so sunfish will drive off a set of minnows that are coming in to eat their eggs. They'll drive them off one side and they'll come in on the back side or something like that. It's a really, really interesting thing to sit and watch. Again, on the side of the stream and contemplate life. A lot of fun watching these fish work. It is tolerant of high turbidity and siltation, and it avoids streams with high gradients. So typically it's in those larger streams towards the lower end. And finally, we're getting down to this fourth order stream. This is my title slide picture, but this is Spring Creek. It is, I would say, one of the most beautiful prairie streams I've been on. And so you have this mix of gravel and cobble and sand, and you have perennial flow. So it's flowing year round unless it is just a really, really bad drought year. I mean, even last summer, it still had flow in it. So this is the type of stream, again, larger pools, much more width, a lot more habitat available. And so we'll start adding species like the brassy minnow. And so again, interesting distribution. Really, if you're going to find brassy minnows in the state, you're going to find them in the upper Sheridan. And so as it implies, it is a brassy colored minnow. It's one of those, it's funny, whenever I find those, somebody will ask, well, what makes it a brassy minnow? And I just look at it and I say, I don't know, it's just a brassy minnow. When you see them, you know what they are. This kind of dark line really shows up on them. Just a kind of a heavy bodied small fish. And so again, they're holding their own in the upper Sheridan. They're much more common in more northern states, so we're kind of at the southern edge of their range. The next species and last one we'll talk about is the trout perch, and this is a really interesting fish. It's got features similar to a perch and features similar to a trout. So it's got an adipose fin. It's got spots that kind of remind me of like a speckled sea trout. It is neither. It is a trout perch. And these, we have a little concern about these because we're not seeing them as much anymore. You find them in deeper pools in the larger streams, and we're not finding as many. And so it's something that we're putting our heads together and trying to think of ways that we can investigate that a little bit more. But I encounter them in the upper Sheridan, and in the upper Locust Creek, I've got some holes where I typically catch them in, but typically they're much larger streams, fourth or fifth order deep pools, flowing water, and they hang out in the deep. So kind of trying to wrap this up a little bit, what are some threats that we see with prairie streams? So because of the soils, because of the heavy agriculture, just the location, prairie streams typically are impounded. That is one of the biggest risks, is they're easy to impound. And so whether it's like this individual who built a dam to pump water for a recreational wetland on Locust Creek, or it's smaller headwater sites where impoundments are built for soil conservation or flood control or just for a fishing pond, that has impacts on the stream system. When you go from something that is intermittent to being under 10 feet of water, that changes things. And so that has an impact on the systems. The next is channelization. I think I mentioned earlier that a lot of these streams are channelized, they're straightened. They were done so many years ago. Some still occurs today illegally, but a lot of times it was done to make it easier to farm or to drain the water off more quickly. But when you straighten a stream, again, you reduce its length, you reduce its channel complexity, you increase erosion, you decrease depth. You're doing a lot of things. So that changes the fish community greatly. Another thing to think about is, again, it's a highly agricultural area. So a lot of what we see is farming up to the edge, whether it's grazing, haying, cropping. And the same can be said in urban areas, building lawns and houses right up to the edge of a stream. But essentially removing the vegetation that held the bank in place, now we're getting more soil erosion. And so whenever your streams and fish community depend on what I was talking about earlier of adequate depth to maintain water throughout the dry periods, as you start to fill in those pools with fine sediment, you start to lose that habitat. And so you end up in situations like this where a stream can be completely choked with sand. And so the water's still there, it's just flowing under the surface. And unfortunately, fish can't live in the sand under the surface, even though the water's there, unless it has a place where a pool has been washed out and they're able to hold on there for a while. You'll lose the fish community. And so just as a quick example here of how quickly you can lose a pool. This was a pool that was about 2 feet deep. That is the top of a post that I had some sensors attached to. And in one rain event, we had a lot of sediment move. That's actually my knee right there. So I'm in about 18 inches of sediment, which was once a pool. So where that pool was, there's no longer any habitat for the fish to live there. So that's something that, all these things can do, adding sediment to the system and reducing that pool depth. So just a final quick slide. So, what's an answer for that? Well, it is planning what you do and doing it in the right place. So this is a picture out of a Union Ridge conservation area. We still have row crop in the bottomlands, but we have, in the uplands, we've done these conversions to native warm season grasses. Near the stream, Spring Creek's on the other side of these trees. We have a nice grass buffer, and then we have shrubs, and then eventually these large trees along the stream. And that's all to buffer the practices between what we're doing on the land and protecting the stream there to prevent excess sedimentation from occurring there. So with that, I will open up to any questions here. Again, this photo is from that same stream on Poozy Conservation Area, just more of the layers of limestone bedrock. But I think it's a pretty little stream to look at as we think about questions, and hopefully I can have some interaction here. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. It's just so awesome to hear all the different stories of these different species that, yeah, we hear about or at least I'm more familiar with southern Missouri streams, but just to see that there are counterparts of many of the species that we know from there, like darters and suckers, but there are more northern Missouri species there too. So that was really cool. We do have some questions, and yeah, everyone just keep putting those in the Q&A, but I wanted to start out with asking you more about your snorkeling work, or can you tell us more about what your field work looks like?
Yeah, so the snorkeling that I mentioned, that was actually from an undergraduate project I did with actually somebody I grew up with, and he and I went to undergrad together, and he works for the department as well in science. He's a scientist too, but we're looking at blacknose shiners at Prairie Forks Conservation Area and Whetstone Conservation Area in Callaway County, and so we're trying to look at the life history of that fish. It's another prairie species that we're essentially on the southern limit of its range, and not much is known about its habits. Actually, I had an interesting conversation with Dr. Flieger, who literally wrote the book on fishes of Missouri. But he talked about how he was so hopeful that we'd be able to see how those things spawn, because he spent so much time trying to figure it out. And he said it'd get to the right time, and he'd see these gravid females, so females that were ready to lay eggs, and everything would be staging. And he said they'd just disappear, and he could never figure out how they went about spawning. And so that was kind of what we were trying to do. We never figured it out either. The same thing. They'd just disappear, and then a few weeks later, you'd have a bunch of small baby, young of the year black nose shiners. So I don't know what they do, but that was it. So you go into these headwater streams, you crawl in from the lower end of it. We actually started doing surveys in January or February, so we were breaking ice. It was very cold. I don't recommend that. We were trying to track them throughout the year, but yeah, these small headwater streams, a creek like this, we would snorkel in, count fish, measure things, just trying to do life history studies on those fish. So that's most of the time people are seining fish and things like that. And we did some of that for other samples on them. But yeah, in these smaller headwater streams, they can be quite clear, and you can actually snorkel, and you can do that on your, for fun if you want to. Go down a stream and just slowly enter in, so you're not mixing a whole lot up. Sit there, and the fish they'll swim away from you, but then they'll come up and they'll be very interactive with you. And so you can see what the fish are doing. Just sit there with your snorkel just above the water and watch them. So highly recommend it for folks.
Yeah, definitely. And you had some really interesting descriptions of their life history, how some would, yeah, they have their nests that they defend. And can you speak to, you mentioned that some are predatory and some eat algae. Can you talk about the sort of percentage of each? Are there more herbivorous fish?
You're going to have more that are on the primary consumer side. Yeah. So more that are eating. So typically, whenever let's say you do a fish sample in a pool like this, the majority of the fish would be those sand shiners and stonerollers, because they're the lower portion of the food chain, and then as you start moving up in the food chain, you're going to get fewer and fewer. And so a stream, a headwater stream, a prairie headwater stream naturally would not have had something like a largemouth bass in it, because it wouldn't have been able to support it. And so what we see is those types of streams where you get a flushing of largemouth bass out of ponds into these headwater streams. If you went to a pool at the beginning of the summer, you'd have maybe, let's say, 12 to 15 species of fish, including that largemouth bass that got washed in. And by the end of the summer, you might have the bass, a green sunfish, and whatever creek chubs were big enough to escape it. So those predatory species will eliminate the diversity of the community. So typically there weren't a whole lot of predatory species. Now a creek chub, a fish is going to eat what it will fit in its mouth, but they don't necessarily key in on small fish. Creek chubs will eat insects, terrestrial or aquatic, that sort of thing. So typically you don't see a lot of predatory fish. You see a lot of things that are insectivorous, or eating algae or eating ooze is what they call it, just the bio ooze at the bottom of the stream.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we had one question of just generally what invasive fish do you see? And yeah, that invasive name, I mean, you could consider bass in the play, in a yeah, can you speak
Right.
to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's like, where they always say a plant in the wrong place is a weed, same way with a fish. So largemouth bass aren't necessarily invasive. They're a native species. They're a sport species. I like to catch bass, but they're not native to a headwater stream. And so in largemouth bass, bluegill, channel catfish, kind of that trifecta that folks typically stock in ponds, and which we had a hand in doing for many years as an agency, not knowing all the impacts and everything like that. But those of those three, the largemouth bass would be the absolute worst. From a non-game species standpoint, I've been seeing in north central Missouri a lot more Gambusia affinis, which is the mosquito fish, western mosquito fish. You didn't really see those 20 years ago, and then now it seems like they're in every small stream. And so I know that there have been, I worked with landowners that were stocking those in their ponds because there was this thought going around for a while that it was during the mosquito-borne illness period, that they could control the mosquitoes, so they'd stock those in their pond. I'm like, well, they're getting eaten by the largemouth bass in your pond, so it doesn't really matter. But I don't know if that's led to their spread and they've just gotten out from that. I don't know if they've just been migrating just as you get warmer stream water temperatures. I just don't really know, but we're seeing more of those in our samples. And I'd say that would be it. In the headwater streams, you typically don't get the invasives like the carps or things like that, because they need a more of a perennial system, a larger system. So yeah, largemouth bass would be like the primary one. Like I don't like to see largemouth bass in a small stream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you. That answers that question. We had one specific question about orange throat darters.
Yes.
Yeah, can you speak to that species if you see them often in your study
Um,
areas?
where I work, so orange throats are not found west of the 63 essentially. So you have the dividing line between the Mississippi River and then the Missouri River tributaries. So most of my work was done in the Sheridan drainages, the Grand Ranges, and orange throats aren't found there. But you get down close to Columbia and like Pershing Creek or Hinkson, or some of those direct Missouri River tributaries, or anything that's flowing over to the Mississippi, and then kind of that middle part of the state. Yeah, you pick up orange throat darters, and so I think actually some of those have been renamed. There's a whole suite. It used to be orange throat darters, and now there's like a brook darter, and I've been out of that game for so long, I don't know what they are, but I think there might be 10 different species of those now. So, but yeah, all pretty similar. But yeah, when I was in college, I'd go sample those, and I'd keep them in an aquarium. They're really a really neat little fish, and you could train them to eat brine shrimp, and they'd come up and swim in front of your finger. So I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying that yeah, they're a neat little darter.
Awesome, thank you. We had one question of can you name a few public prairies where people can visit to experience these, as close to pristine prairie streams as we can? Or, do you have sites that you can recommend to our listeners. And there are a few MPF sites that have, that and I'd like to hear more about swales, or, that's what we experience most on our prairies, but we can also follow up with MPF prairies that have first and second order streams on them. But if you have some public areas that you would recommend to our viewers.
Yeah, so I mean, if you want to go check out some streams, walk some streams, there are regulations on sampling or things like that. But just for the general person that wants to go out and experience it, Union Ridge Conservation Area would be like on the top of my list. So northwest of Kirksville, about 20 minutes. We have Spring Creek Ranch Natural Area in the heart of it, and I wouldn't go there in August because it's ticks and everything like that. But this time of year, it's kind of nice to walk the streams. But any one of those streams on that area, you can, they're all a little unique. But the streams that run through the heart of Spring Creek Ranch Natural Area, you won't see anything like that in the state as far as I'm concerned. I haven't. So they're really unique. I haven't been to the stream, but on I think it's Taborville Prairie. There's a second order stream that goes through it. I think it's a fairly decent stream, and it might have some beaver dams on it as well. I've heard good things about it. I've just never made it to that one. A lot of our conservation areas that are in the northern part of the state will have streams on it, and they're in various shapes as far as how pristine those streams are. But yeah, Union Ridge Conservation Area would be the top one. Poozy Conservation Area north of Chillicothe, it has a few streams. Like this one in particular is on the it'd be on the east side of the area. It's a really neat little getaway. I mean, it's you don't have to walk very far from a parking lot. You walk down. There's like a little low water crossing. If you go upstream, it was that first one that I was talking about. That's that one. You go downstream, it's pools like this and a lot of limestone. It reminds me a lot of what I grew up on in Howard County, just that kind of border type stream. So Poozy's a good one to go to as well. So, and then close to Columbia, Rudolph Bennett, Montauk Creek goes through Rudolph Bennett on one side, Percy Creek goes through the other. Those are prairie streams. Now, they incorporate some of that Ozark border aspect to them, but in general, those are prairie streams. And so those are larger ones, and you get a lot more of that pool development and things like that. So offhand, those are the ones I can think of.
Awesome. Yeah, that gives us all a list to go off of, but great. Thank you so much. We had a couple questions regarding impounding and the impact of farming on these streams. And so one question was, does impounding require a permit in Missouri that you know of?
It depends on the stream. So a stream that has flow that is covered under the Clean Water Act, there are permitting requirements, and we're not the permitting agency. So the Corps of Engineers and Missouri Department of Natural Resources are the two permitting agencies, and so it's a 401, 404 dual permit that would be required on that. A lot of streams fall outside of the Clean Water Act because they're so far up in the headwaters. They're not concerned, they're considered an ephemeral stream, which isn't covered under the endangered or the Clean Water Act, and so they may not require a permit, but it's always best to check site specific stuff. So yeah, you can't give a blanket statement that they are or they aren't. It's always best to ask.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you. And again, maybe another question that can't be answered with a blanket statement, but can you speak to you spoke about farming up to the edge of a stream and how that can cause this erosion. Can you speak to maybe what these streams looked like before that farming happened, and how was that stream channel held before, and how much of a buffer on a stream is needed in order to prevent that sort of erosion?
No, that's a great question. So I mean, pre-European settlement, we would have had a mix of, you would have gone from, more of a prairie system in the uplands, and then it would grade into a savanna woodland, and then you probably had bottomland forest all the way across, but you probably had some wet prairie. I think some of the GLO notes show wet prairie areas where it was wet enough most of the time that you didn't get tree growth, so it was grassy and 4B and stuff like that. And so the streams themselves would have, the larger streams would have likely had probably a fully intact floodplain forest at some level. I didn't, from side to side, I don't know, it just kind of depends on a lot of things, but there would have been trees along the stream, brush along the stream, and further up in the headwaters, you probably would have graded from wooded riparian corridors to shrubby to the, like what you were talking about with swales, where you didn't have a defined channel, but it was a wet area that interacted with groundwater, and it would have had like prairie cord grass or something like that. But the take home of all that was you had vegetation there holding the soil in place, and then shading at whatever level it was, but holding the soil in place. And you would have had a sinuous channel, so an S-shaped channel, which is the way water naturally runs downhill, is kind of an S shape. If you ever pour water out onto a patio or something, you watch it, it moves in an S shape. That's due to the physical nature and a lot of other things. That's why water flows that way. So it would have been an S-shaped channel. Well, humans like straight lines. We mow our lawns in straight lines. We build with straight lines, and it's a lot easier to farm with straight lines. I understand it. I mean, it makes sense. We make our property lines straight. And so over the years, in areas where you were doing row crop agriculture in the bottomlands especially, but in some of the smaller streams that had a little bit wider valley, you would have removed the vegetation next to the stream, and then you would have straightened the stream channel so it was straight and easy to run up against. And so what that does, again, it causes the stream gradient to increase. So from point A to point B, the elevation was like this before. Well, now we've moved point B this close, so now we got a higher gradient, same elevation but shorter distance, so higher gradient, so that increases the speed of the water, which increases the erosive force. So you have down cutting and then you have widening. And so that widening is what we're seeing a lot of today. Is you're losing 6 rows of corn every year because the stream doesn't have anything to hold it back. And so, or in some instances, one side of the stream, we've got a riparian corridor that was established, and the trees have grown up and they're mature and they're holding the soil there. And so the stream can't move that direction, so it's moving the direction that's easiest. So it's moving laterally across the floodplain, and it's eating into those rows of corn or beans or whatever. And the same can be said for haying. Haying right up to the edge. You kill the trees out so you have more sunlight for the grass right there, or with a livestock access to the stream, they're knocking the stream bank down, that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of different things at play. So yeah, we recommend on small streams, so first, second order, at least a 50-foot corridor buffer of appropriate vegetation. I'd say that because if you plant it all to cool season grass like fescue, there's no point. It doesn't do anything because the root system is this shallow, and so it doesn't hold the soil anyways. So appropriate vegetation. So if it's a first order stream that would have been normally had prairie vegetation, you might go with warm season grasses and a mix of shrubs and stuff like that. But as you get to a larger stream and more incision, you're going to have larger trees. And so larger streams, so we go from 50-foot corridor to 100-foot corridor to like a 200 plus on a really large stream. So, and and there's a lot of science behind that about filtering out the water, also providing a buffer. But essentially, you're just trying to buy time for the plants to establish, to get rooted in there, to let the stream naturally heal its course. So you may plant a riparian corridor and never live to see the day where it grew that forest to protect the stream. But you know, we're dealing with geology. So
Great, thank you so much. Just a couple more questions, but thank you. That was a great explanation of the gradient and kind of bringing that steep, you know, making that jump, causing all that erosion. So thank you so much. Yeah, depth is important for fish. You know, they need that sustained water. How common is it for fish to move up and down the channel in order to stay with the water? Can you speak to that?
yeah, so there is so little we know about headwater species. We know a lot. I say a lot, but like, bigger. We know like salmon. Salmon. They go up way up high in the upper rivers to spawn, and then they go out to the ocean. And, they make hundreds of miles of movement, and we're seeing that with like flathead catfish and big rivers and everything. But these small systems are very hard to study, and so we just don't know a whole lot. I know of at least one master's thesis that was done by Nick Gerondo. He works for us down in the Ozark region, and he did his out of, I think it might have been Arkansas State or something, but he was looking at that aspect. So down in Arkansas, they have these streams that are on that gradient between ephemeral, intermittent, and whenever there's water, there's tons of fish species, and then it's dry, and where did they go? And so he found that they had this migratory pattern to them, and I've seen something similar, but I don't have any real data because I haven't tagged fish and tracked them and everything. But fish do move up whenever the water's up; they're moving up, and so like Topeka shiners, they're really good at moving and getting up into those headwaters to either spawn or whatever, and fish do that. They take advantage of that. I think a lot of it is they move up, they'll spawn, and then that you'll encounter a lot of the young of the year in the headwaters, and you won't see the adults until you get further down. So they're taking advantage of that shallower water, fewer predators to deal with, more resources, more interaction with what's going on the landscape, more nitrogen and phosphorus and all that. So they do move. We just don't understand a whole lot of it, and so there's a whole lot more that we can learn.
Great, cool. It's exciting to think of the mysteries that that lie with them still. So we'll end with this question because thank you so much for your time and we appreciate it. But can you speak to aquatic insects in these streams? Many people are familiar with mayflies and caddisflies, but are these the kinds of insects that you find in these streams, or are there different ones?
No, you'll see mayflies, caddisflies, stoneflies. You'll see a whole range of them. Now, once you get up past that, intermediate to ephemeral, once you're getting in the ephemeral one, you just don't really encounter them much because the water's not there during the whole life cycle. And so, but intermediate streams will have, dragonflies and see a lot of dragonflies and mayflies in a lot of the streams up here. I'm not an expert in them. I don't know them. Of course, crayfish. And one of the coolest thing is whenever you find like mussels, it's an aquatic invertebrate, mussels in a headwater stream, because that indicates permanent flow, because mussels can't go anywhere, and so whenever you find live mussels there, that indicates some level of permanency. And so the one of the places I was talking about on Spring Creek Ranch natural area, there's a stream there that we have 2 or 3 species of mussels in, and it's a second order stream. We typically wouldn't see that, but it's such a high quality stream, and it has such a good interaction with the majority of the watershed is in native warm season grasses. It's just it's high quality habitat, and so they're able to flourish there. And I know one of our scientists, he's documented several aquatic inverts. I don't know which ones they are. I maybe a mayfly or something like that, but he's finding new stuff all over the place all the time. But he's found several species that hadn't been found in Missouri. He's found them there as well. So, which kind of goes with it's a holdover from glaciation or something. They've just been living the good life right there in north central Missouri. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Darren, for fielding these questions and for your talk. Just thank you for your time. And I'll pass it over to Amanda, who's going to tell us about some future events. But thanks, Darren.
Absolutely.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you, Darren and Lily, for guiding us through the live questions. And also thank you to everybody at home for your participation. It's a big help. Access to this recording and other information is going to be sent to all of you who registered in a follow-up email tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that from me. And now I'm going to go through a brief review of some upcoming in-person and online events. First, we are excited to continue broadcasting webinars on our region's native and migratory wildlife all through the rest of spring. You can register now to join us Wednesday, April 23rd at 4 p.m. for our Wetlands for Native Bees webinar. It's going to be with native pollinator ecologist Molly Jacobson. Then save the date for our native plants and neotropical bird migration webinar with migratory bird biologist Sarah Kendrick on May 7th at 4 p.m. That registration link will be up soon. Also, here's a reminder to get out to our in-person events and plant sales. We know that native plants will beautify your landscape and help support songbirds and other native wildlife. And these sales are an opportunity to purchase those quality products from our members. We have 2 sales coming up this weekend on April 12th in both St. Louis and Columbia. And then we have another sale just around the corner on Saturday, April 19th in Kansas City. More information on each of those sales, including all of the participating vendors and their pre-order details, are going to be found across all of our channels and in the follow-up email that I'm sending to your inbox tomorrow. Also, new guided prairie walks, hikes of natural areas, and tours of native plantings are added to our event pages all the time. Registration for these events is limited, so we encourage all to check in as they are updated. And then finally, here's a reminder to attend our second Brews and Blooms at Civil Life Brewing Co. in St. Louis on Saturday, April 19th from 3 to 6 p.m. No registrations required for this free and informational event. You can visit our website under the events tab for the latest event updates. And remember to sign up for our biweekly newsletter to get these events and more directly in your inbox. Thank you for joining us, and everyone have a great night. Thanks again, Darren.
Thank you.